So I just wanted to start by thanking the 100,000 people that showed up this morning. Dragged yourself out of your tents. I'm shocked. Yeah, could you just move in a bit at the back? Because, yeah, we can definitely fit everyone in. Just so grateful because it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday and, yeah, we're quite gobsmacked, really. Yeah, so excited for this panel on radical imagination. As you can see, we're starting with our imaginations firing quite strongly this morning. My name is Phoebe Tickell. I'm the founder of an organization called Moral Imaginations. And I'm very, very excited to be on this panel with these two incredibly imaginative, radically imaginative imagination heroes and activists. And we're gonna speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, I think, and then maybe 20 to 30 minutes of questions. So as you listen to us, make sure that you store up your questions and help us stretch our imaginations as well. And I think we're also going to do a very short imagination exercise. So there's going to be a bit of an experiential element to it as well. I'll just introduce myself a little bit and then pass to Daze and Tamsin, and we'll all do a bit of an intro. So where did I start? People often ask me, how did you get into working on imagination? When I introduce myself, I say I'm an imagination activist, and people are like, okay, how does one become an imagination activist? And the first thing I say is anyone can be an imagination activist. So here is your permission slip immediately to be an imagination activist. I started my journey as a scientist back 10 years ago. I was studying biology and molecular biology, and I quite quickly realized that actually we've got all the science and technology we need to make the world more beautiful and make it work for everyone, make it just and beautiful and sustainable. So I went on this journey of asking, well, if we've got all the science and technology we need, what's missing? Why can't we go from like the tools and the technology to action? What is that gap, that like action gap? And after like a long winding journey of being a climate activist and working in governance and all sorts of other things, I came to imagination as being this thing that I think is really missing and being colonized and being narrowed in today's world. And actually, I would say it's one of the biggest existential threats is our collective imaginations kind of just being shut down. So we just settle for what's here rather than what could be and also what should be. And I talk a lot about what I call moral imagination. So imagination can be used for the forces of good, can be used for others, for the welfare of all. It can also be used to create wars and nuclear weapons and all sorts of really not so good things for people and planet and for non-human beings. And so what I work with organizations and governments and people to build this muscle of moral imagination. So getting people to connect to what they really, truly, deeply believe in, what they feel not just could be possible, but should be possible, and help them translate that into action. And I'll talk more about that later. And with that, I'll pass to Daze.
Hello, good morning. I'm Daze. I am a climate justice activist, but also wearing many hats. I feel like, nowadays you can't just have one career. It's like multiple careers all at the same time. But yeah, my interest in climate started not when I was actually quite young. I grew up in poverty in Tottenham in North London. And that experience was harrowing, but it was, I guess, the thing that started everything for me in this like real sense of justice. So when I was younger, I grew up in a one-bedroom flat with my mum, my two brothers and my father. And for a very long time, that was our reality, and I didn't know anything was different. And my mum, she is a dreamer. She's a dream worker, and she had many dreams about setting up businesses and experimenting and sharing our culture through food. And a few years after, she, I guess, had the imagination, but also the heart to action it. And that raised our family from poverty to very middle class within the space of around 6 months, which is crazy. From moving to, living, sharing a bed with my two brothers to like having my own room in a house in Enfield was like mad. But through that transition, I also saw what just a little bit of economics can do
to your whole prospects of where you think your life is going, what careers you are open to, what your environment outside looks like as well. Because in this time, my mum sent me to boarding school, but she sent me to a very strange boarding school because she wanted me to have the best education, but she didn't want me to turn out as a prick. So she sent me to a very small boarding school in Lincolnshire. And yes. Yes, and it was amazing. It was a boarding house that truly cared for the young people. Our house parents, who still I see as my parents today, taught us how to rear chickens, how to take care of animals, how to take care of the land, and how to build relationship with the land. And for me, it was leaving something that was very traumatic to finding safety in nature. And that built my relationship and started like my first love story, which was falling in love with the land. But when I was 16, I moved back to London, and then in that moment, I actually ended up getting very sick and lots of respiratory issues. And I was going to doctor upon doctor, trying to figure out what was wrong. But everyone failed to mention that London has had an air pollution crisis for the last 20, 30 years, and that we were breathing in 7 times over the legal limit of air pollution. And then I found out that there was actually an incinerator burning trash every single day a mile away from my house, and this was affecting birth defects, the families around, and these families are working class families. They're black and brown people, and it was all these moments of recognizing that justice is so intertwined with our environment, so intertwined with the way that we live. So I went through many years of anxiety and depression, but a few years later at university, I ended up accidentally going to a meeting that changed my life. It was a meeting with Extinction Rebellion. Yes, I was 18. I just wanted to go to a pub with my friend, and she said we had to go to this meeting first. So I went, okay, why not? And when I went in, I met community. I met what it means to love and what it means to take duty in actually solving issues. And I was first open to imagining far bigger than what I thought was possible, to the point of when they would say stuff, I'd be like, that's not possible. Because I was so sure that it wasn't possible because my imagination had been squashed so much. And I remember Roger Hallam, one of the co-founders, told me, we are going to have a rebellion that will change history. He said, we are going to shut down central London, and we know we've been successful when Pret doesn't get its sandwiches. And that's when I said, okay, I'm here for the ride, but I don't think it will happen. And lo and behold, 15th of April that year, I watched a rebellion that was forged by the love and rage of so many people, so many activists and people who just decided enough's enough and we deserve better, and was doing this purely out of love. And when you've seen like imagination, but then also this like feeling of awe and wonder of seeing a world actualize in front of you just by having the hope and the strength to will it, it was amazing, and it changed everything for me. So a few months later, I ended up running for Parliament. Very casually. Roger was like, have you ever thought about politics? I was like, I can't afford it. He said, if I found out the money, would you do it? And I went, yeah, fuck yeah. And then like he came with like $5,000 in a plastic bag and told me, now it's your time to go. Yes, exactly. And then I kind of had this moment of, what does reimagining politics look like? What does this look like? Does this look like being with community? Does this look like infusing direct action into shaking the conversation, right? And I did like a whole piece on basically reimagining politics with lots of different people and doing it, because that's the thing about imagination. A lot of the time we talk about the beautiful stuff we can imagine, but rarely do we ever feel like we have the strength and agency to step into our own power to make it happen. And that's what XR taught me. And then, I've done a lot of weird things since then. I sued the government last year twice. Yes, I sued them over not having a net zero strategy, then sued them because their net zero strategy was shit when they did have one. And and then went on to work in media, because I think culture is a really strong way to get people to buy into remembering what it is to love life. It is culture, it's people, it's community, and I ended up being the director of a media company. Yes.
Casual.
Where we decided that we wanted to teach climate education differently, of where we would teach it through infographics and meet people where they're at, and it's called Earthrise Studio. And then I moved on, and now I'm doing lots of crazy imagining in creative spaces as well, with museums, and bringing in what does it mean to be on the grassroots, and how do we get that into mainstream culture and make that the mainstream culture, a culture of care, love, and duty.
Yes!
Woo.
Good morning, everyone. Is everyone feeling like, I'm ready for this? Like, let me at it. That fuck yeah moment that Daze was talking about when Roger turned up with a bag with $5,000 in it. I was like, here you go. Yes, I think that is, for me, the difference between sitting around and imagining something together and actually kind of being activated into making that thing a real thing, is whatever it takes to give yourself permission, or to get the permission, or to get the support. And that can be through community, it can be through crowdfunding, it can be through having a really brilliant idea and just going for it. That goes, okay, yeah, fuck yeah, I can do this. This is something that actually I can do. It's not just those people over there that make stuff happen. I can be a change maker. And I guess I'll just talk a bit about myself. My name's Tamsin Omond, and I've been active in environmental spaces, kind of activist spaces for so many years now. I'm older than I look. I'm actually 38. But I spend lots of time in tents, which is why I look like this. And I am living a life beyond the imagination of the child that I was, for sure. Today, and also beyond the imagination of my queer ancestors, the people who had to be ashamed of themselves and didn't get to have a wife. Here's my beautiful wife, who I got to wake up next to in a tent. These realities are realities that didn't just come about because one person imagined that it might be possible for us to live in a world where two people of these genders could be together. It's it happened because people needed that reality to be true so that they could exist well in this life. And then enough injustice, at some point people were like, fuck this, we're going to get organized. I'm so sorry, little child at the back. But it's all right, because they're just words. And we can fill them up with whatever meaning we want. And so, my life today, this panel is a panel beyond the imaginations of those people who insisted that it should only be white dudes that sat on panels and had big ideas and, participated in debates and set culture and decided on the direction of travel. And I guess in some ways, I feel, we are standing so firmly on the shoulders of those people who came before us and fought for the space that we're taking. And I really hope that our taking this space will allow more people to come forward and fill, the space that we're leaving behind us, because our imaginations are, they're the best imaginations we have, right? But they're super limited by the structures within which we're all sitting. My imagination is the imagination of white supremacy. My imagination is the imagination of a colonial power. My imagination is also the imagination of a trans person who was assigned female at birth and had the experience of growing up a woman. I sit on, various places within the kind of oppressive and liberated imaginations, but I hold those realities inside of me, and for me, the best thing that I can try to do is try to become more aware of those structures that are that have colonized my imagination, that I can't escape from, that I'm completely enthralled by, that I want affirmation, I want to be the leader, I want to be the person at the front, I want you all to respect me, I want to get paid, I want to have more money than other people. You know, I am, like, I have all of that inside of me. And then also I have this yearning and this deep, like very often unmet need for so many different ways of being in the world that I have not been trained in, that I haven't been taught to respect or to love. And, you know, those, I think, like my best guess is that those are more human, that they make more sense, that they belong more in line with and attached to the natural world, that they could be the truest expression of something that is intrinsically me, and that this stuff in my head that tells me that I have to be better than you all, that I have to impress you, that I have to make more money than you, like that this is actually not the truest, most intrinsic expression of myself, and that the one that fights for justice, that wakes up in the loving arms of their wife, like that this is the way that I want to exist in the world. But, you know, those powers are strong, and, you know, they might not be expressed in this tent, they might not be expressed in this field or at this festival, but we are living in the world that some white, Western, male, rich guy imagined 250 years ago. You know, he saw the world, it was opening up, there were all of these things that he couldn't control, and so he started to create structures to divide us and to oppress people and to always put himself at the top. And how we topple that imaginative landscape is, I think it's like a life's work, and we have to do it within ourselves, and accepting that that will never be done. That, you know, this is the soup in which we were formed, and all we can do is move ourselves a little bit further away from it, so that those that come after us have a little bit more space to dream, and then we have to do it out there. And yeah, I can talk about, like, you know, some of the ways that, you know, I've inhabited a world beyond my imagination, not just in the fact that, you know, I'm free for now to love who I want and to be who I am, but also in, you know, the extraordinary activism that I've been part of and have helped to create, just, you know, from the kernel of an idea, like that initial idea of we can shut down London for 2 weeks. You know, we can shut down London until Pret don't get their sandwiches delivered. You know, the initial kernel of that idea, which was like how that became a reality that we were all participating in, that didn't belong to those people who originally had that idea, but belonged to everybody that was showing up and participating in those spaces, and making those spaces be the kind of radical, exciting, imaginative spaces that, you know, that we dream of. But maybe I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, and I'm going to hand back to you.
Wow. Thank you, Tamsin, and thank you, Daze. Thank you for that amazing kickoff. As you were talking, Tamsin, I was thinking of a quote that I love by writer and activist Adrienne Marie Brown, which I'm just going to read out. And they say, "We are in an imagination battle. I often feel I'm trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free." And when I hear that, when I hear you speak, Tamsin, the image that comes to mind is like an enormous kind of weighty force that's just like kind of bearing down on our collective imaginations. And as these imagination activists, what we need to do is like flex the muscles, like actually build those muscles of imagination, not just imagination, but the radical imagination, or the imagination that actually visions how the world like could and should be, and forces that weight off. And, you know, I think we're facing so many pressures on the imagination. You know, you look at school, you know, put your hand up if you have a child or you're responsible stewarding the life of a young person today and sending them to school. Not many people, okay. Okay, there's one person. Woohoo, okay, no kids in the house. Okay, but still, so like, you know, sending kids to school today, like, not only is there just like the crazy examination structures and like the performance culture and like an immediate indoctrination into sitting at desks and all facing, you know, a hierarchical system where you're told, like, you know, basically you can either kind of pass or fail, whereas imagination flourishes in the space where there is no pass and fail, where there is just creativity, where there is just yes and, where it's like that limitless, boundless, infinite place that we're all born with the right to exercise that muscle and that ability to just freely imagine. And then you go home and you've got TV and Netflix is immediately using its algorithms to serve you up the next thing, to just like colonize your imagination and program how you imagine, what you see. It's full of white men, basically, like same sorts of people, and you're immediately again getting your imagination programmed. What kind of people should be are in power? Like, what does power look like? What does decision making look like? What does the future look like? Look at the films that we're seeing. Like, mostly when films talk about the future, it's very dystopian. It's very, very hard to imagine a more beautiful world really tangibly, like as activists. And when you ask people to try and vision, like, what does the world you really long for and yearn for look like in kind of 10 years' time, people really struggle. It's hard. It's actually hard to grasp that, because we're so often, as activists, we're so oriented towards fighting the systems of oppression and inequality and injustice that actually through that work, the danger and the risk is that we orient towards what is and not what could be. And so as activists of the imagination, which is a necessary fight, it's a necessary battle, as Adrienne Marie Brown talks about, in today's world in the 21st century. I'm going to ask both of you, and maybe we can talk for a little bit, what are the tools and what are the ways that we need to keep on flexing those imagination muscles? And if you imagine the same way, when you look at your body and you're like, wow, I've got a bit kind of weak, my muscles are a bit kind of atrophied, I'm going to go to the gym. What is the equivalent of pumping imagination iron in today's world?
Yeah, it's play.
It's play.
Like, it's so delicious to be like a child. And I feel like, so in my first year of university, I worked as a primary school teacher, and that was groundbreaking for me, especially that being married with the beginning of my activism. Because young people have a way of calling out bullshit and recognizing. I remember quite fondly, one day I was explaining what are fossil fuels and why they're bad, and how what we do is the world kind of sequesters this carbon in and creates fossils, and then we dig them up and then we burn them. And then they were like, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, I've just spent 20 minutes explaining it. What do you mean? Then they were like, no, that doesn't make sense, because if the earth is sequestering it, why are we digging it back up? And then I realized I had been colonized to think this makes sense. And it's this kind of like purity in thought and this real sense of right and wrong that children have that we lose when we grow up, because it becomes compromise. It becomes, in order to fit in, I have to give this, I have to give this. And then at one point you kind of lose that sense of play and of right and wrong in the way that a child has it. So for me, it's like to flex that muscle is to be with children, one, and really honoring children as not just like people who we have to take care of, but people who have their own agency, people who can teach us, as full people, but then also it's just playing. And like I'm a fond lover of trees. I live on a boat with a bunny because I want my life to feel whimsical and I want it to be imagination. Oh yes, it is very weird in my house. I live in the middle of woodlands at the moment, and every morning I go swimming, and every morning I climb trees, and it is just like it's possible, And a lot of the time we are kind of like, we get dragged down in the realities of the world of money, all of these kind of things. But what I've learned is it's very much in this position that if we're not really living now, what are we living for? And having that kind of constant thing of every single day I should live as though I am imagining the world that my younger self would have fucking loved, And I think that's the way that we have to go forward. And when you do that, and that's like the exercise bit, it makes everything else become a dreamscape, like especially with like some of my more like outlandish activism. It literally is just me journaling, going, if I was gonna get thousand pounds. What would I do with this money to help the world? And then it's like, okay, I don't have this money, but I have this idea, you know, and it's about action it. It's about being able to kind of like ask those questions, be in community, and also receive as well. Because I realized for a long time I give a lot, but I didn't end up realizing I could also receive as well, and receiving help, receiving support in this journey of us creating imaginations together, you know, and that's the beauty. And I know you said about dystopias, and I'm actually quite the fan of dystopias, because it's the reality of what happens if we don't imagine well enough. Because, you know, I think every single day it is an active choice. It's an active choice to do or not to do. And dystopias are kind of this constant reminder of this is what the world could be like. Because a lot of dystopias are taken from history. They're taken from things that have already happened before. And what we have to do is remember and hold this darkness, but then also match it with light. And remember that we are trying to be that light in this darkness, you know. So yeah, I'm very much for the yin and yang and the love and rage and encompassing all things. Because, yeah, I think that's where imagination spaces kind of go a bit weird when we imagine too positively without basing ourselves in the reality that the world sometimes is pretty bleak, you know, and how do we hold both but then also still have the hearts to imagine better.
Thank you, Daze. I just wanted to pick out that question that you journal of, like, what would I do if I had £1 million, or there's a question that I really love, that I really like lands in my heart, which is like, what would you do if you had the fearless confidence that you couldn't fail? And what that opens up, and just that tiny, small.
Like my mum would always say, you have to go into every room as though you're the most mediocre average white man. Not even a good one, just a mediocre one. Because and if we all walked in with that audacity, with that kind of sense of entitlement to the world,
we would all be fine. I've got a friend who says, act like you've got the confidence of a 22-year-old life coach. That's imagination activism right there. Tamsin, how are you pumping imagination iron?
Feeling a little bit embarrassed about my life coach career that I started when I was 22. Anyone can meet me afterwards and I can tell you how to... It's not true. I'm not a life coach. Yeah, I love this pumping iron thing because I hate pump. I mean, I don't know what it would be to pump iron, but I do want to like stretch the capacities of my imagination, and I often feel like, you know, I don't give myself time to do that. I don't rest. I don't take breaks from like being in the whatever the thing is that I'm in. So I guess like first of all, you know, give yourself time to imagine. And there's this book, I'm sure some people might have done it. It's called The Artist's Way. And, you know, they have this thing like on a weekly basis, take an artist date. And just, I guess that is like creating a time of play with yourself, and you know, you can direct it in whichever way you want to. It doesn't need to be like completely self-serving or like very, you know, self-interested. It could be an altruistic act that you did on your artist date, whatever it is. And I think like that was really game-changing for me, because I found in that process of, you know, doing the artist's way, that was the one that I found most difficult to do. Just like offer myself the gift once a week of a couple of hours of doing something nice alone, you know, like not dragging some people with you or like serving the community, but just like, actually, what am I, you know, where does my imagination live? Like, do I like scribbling with crayons? Do I like creating collages? Like what, like, you know, I was taught that if you're not good at that stuff, don't do it. Like, you only get to do art if you're an artist. You only get to create if you're going to be a creative director. Like, you don't get to just do that. And I think, you know, as much as possible, like, do give yourself time to do that. And then, you know, I guess I want to balance that, because I think I agree that you can kind of fall into a place of like some fantasy life where we're like protected by our privilege and we don't have to exist in like the world that our privilege has created, and all of the externalities of our privilege, like our massive carbon footprints and our waste and our like how many slaves do we have in our house from the products that we consume, and et cetera. So I think like, as well as, you know, don't let imagination be fantasy. Like don't let it rest on a foundation of oh yeah, but everything's fine, let's just sit and imagine and hope that like our imagination might create a fairer world. Like we need a just world. We don't need a little bit more fairness. We need like a transformation that actually brings justice. We need to abolish systems of oppression. We don't just need to like fiddle with them. And that work is not one that we can do like it is a life's work. And I guess, part of that ensuring that your imagination, that the ground upon which you're imagining is really the ground that we live on. And I think quite a lot of that is about like taking time to really educate ourselves about like who we are, where we're living, why we get to live like this, who are those that our way of life has impacted on, whose intelligence are we replicating in what we're creating? Do we want to replicate that? Like, my worst nightmare is when I find myself like when that kind of, like colonial imagination is being expressed through me, and I find myself like desperate for whatever it is, like a little piece of worth that I can hold on to and everyone can respect it. It's so exhausting. So I think, we do need to do quite a lot of work to let go of that stuff. So yeah, like musculature, building the musculature to like have a really good imaginative life. Like I think there is a lot of play and there's probably quite a lot of work.
Oh yeah, like if you've climbed a tree, you know that play is work. And yeah, I really love what you were saying about that, because it's kind of, imagination has that two sides of where, like we talk about Joanna Macy and active hope, and how it's not just about dreaming and thinking, but it's about doing, and I feel like that's usually the part that we're constantly missing out. But it's because people don't feel like they have the agency to do, and that takes imagination. Because I remember growing up, like watching my mum do was really inspiring to me, because I saw how my mum, she grew up in a rural village in Nigeria, and then like to start a restaurant, to bring wealth to her family, to take care of her loved ones. And watching that, I saw her imagination at play. And if I didn't, I don't think I would have like the imagination to think beyond what does it mean to exist in this, black body of a woman, and where that sits in society as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely doing that inner work. And then also, yeah, the history is amazing, because history tells you like everything you need to know about the world that you're living in right now. I'm a historian, so obviously. But yeah, there's something about the way that history tells us about how change is made and the time it takes and the work it takes. That is a constant reminder in my activism. So when people are like, it's crazy, it's things aren't going as well as planned. I remember Extinction Rebellion had the audacity to think we'll solve the whole climate crisis in one rebellion at the beginning. And I remember being told by Gail that this isn't a fight, this is a dance. This is going to take moments of swaying, of going. This is going to be a process to create change, and change that is lasting as well. And we kind of have to remember that. It is this like long game. It's this, civil rights movement. It usually takes a death in most movements to get what you want, which isn't great, but it takes time. It takes more than one, exactly.
Yeah, completely. I often like to think like every kind of piece of social and like any kind of infrastructure that exists today that we take for granted, like the NHS or women being able to vote, or just even like benefits, or anything that we just is part of the furniture, was once upon a time deemed impossible. Yeah. Everything that the future generations, the generations who will come, are the generations we will be the ancestors to, will look back on this time and be like, I can't believe they didn't have XYZ. Like, we don't know what that is, and that makes me so excited, because it's like we don't know, and it's going to seem ridiculous. It's going to be rejected. It's going to be things like Extinction Rebellion, where there's mass, on the news, people aren't happy and are complaining and are like, oh, what is this? This isn't changing anything. Like, that's what change looks like. It looks impossible. It looks ridiculous at the time. And so I'm seeing the time, and I wanted to spend just 5 minutes before we open up for questions talking a bit about how we are taking this work out into the world. How are we helping create those environments for imagination and radical imagination. So I wanted to share a little bit about a project that Moral Imaginations has been doing this last year. We trained the first ever local council. We like to say that because it's a bit of imagination activism. It's like Camden Council became the first ever council in the world to train their staff as imagination activists. And by that, it kind of implies that there will be hundreds, because there'll be thousands, like no doubt. And so over the course of a year, we worked with 32 council officers in Camden. And we wanted to work with local councils. Like, to start with, we had a lot of like, where should we start this work? I'd been developing these methods and practices through also the mentorship of Joanna Macy, who's an incredible elder and activist and deep ecologist of this time. And as a team, we were like, where should we do this work? And we thought, well, local councils are the place where everyone feels imagination goes to die. So let's go there. Let's go to the heart of where people are like, no, that's like bureaucracy nightmare. And we're like, great, like local councils should be the centers of civic imagination. Imagine if, like, in 10 years' time, instead of like voting for your local, politician, your local council, or complaining to your local council about the bins, sending emails about how annoyed you are about all the things that don't work in your borough. Imagine if actually there was a way for you to join your fellow residents, fellow citizens in your neighborhood and be like, what do we imagine for this place? What's missing? What would make this place really incredible and amazing for all of us, for all beings, for all of nature? And there was a way for you to be supported to imagine that possible future and translate that into action and get the funding to actually make it happen. Like, imagine if that was the role of local councils, enablers of that civic imagination in place to make the place where you live and you bring up your children and where you buy your food and all of those things. Maybe we won't be buying food, like beyond imagination. Imagine if those places were those platforms. So we trained these council officers. They became ambassadors for imagination within the council. We're now training the leadership of Camden and we're about to embark on embedding imagination into the policy of a local council. And we have no idea what that means, really. But we're going to find out. That's the great thing about being an imagination activist, is you don't always have to know the answer, but you have to be willing to go on the journey to find it out and to be in that yearning of like, I feel like there's there, and we're going to find out together. I think that's the other thing I wanted to mention, is like the conditions for radical imagination is community. It's collective imagination. I can be brave because I'm sitting on this stage with these two amazing humans and activists. Like, we enable each other to have that courage, to have that vision, and we build off each other, and our imaginations mix, and it's diverse, like a good soil, like a mulching compost of soil. Our imaginations are like that. We need to mix them with the imaginations of others. So if you do want to follow along on that project, please do visit our website. We welcome all the support and involvement and other people in local councils, and join the kind of local council imagination activism train. So I wanted to share about that project, and I know that there are inspiring, incredible projects that you're both doing, bringing imagination into the world, because that's something I hear in both of what you're sharing is like, yeah, imagination's great, but if it's just daydreaming and kind of like, fantasy, it's about where that imagination meets action, where it meets that, what the world needs, what we need right now. So how is imagination meeting the world in your work? Do you want to start, Tamsin? Because we can go backwards, give you a bit of time, Daze.
I just like to amplify what you just said. Like, if Camden Council is the first council to transform council officers into ambassadors of imagination, like, give the council officers that title, like, let them be the ambassadors of imagination, then, like, presumably you'll live in places which have councils, and you could just get in touch with them, like local councillors, and let them know about this extraordinary project that Phoebe's starting up, because that sounds like so much of what we need to do in terms of threading like the world that we're in now, weaving that with the world that we need to see, the world that we need to start creating, is going to be at this kind of local government level. So, you know, I think there is a lot of appetite for that. And, you know, it's brilliant that you're doing that. Well done. What am I doing at the moment about imagination? I think all of my life is about trying to open spaces where people can imagine together. You know, I participate in many, like, kind of activist spaces and activist groups, from, you know, the local park like committee, I'm in that, to the kind of bigger picture XR, like steering that ship past, to, you know, at the moment, I guess a lot of my desire to open up spaces for imagination exists within this like totally thorny and like very depressing space of like, are trans people real? And are they a threat to women? And, you know, this isn't a panel about that. And to be honest, I don't have the like energy to go into this on a Saturday morning. But I guess a lot of, you know, I guess at the moment I feel like they're, you know, as will happen with change, like we seem to be moving somewhere, there's something exciting, progress seems to be happening from the grassroots, and, you know, a lot of new voices are flooding into an area, and as happens, you know, that white supremacist imagination is feeling under threat, you know, and it is wanting to assert itself, and it is finding people to assert itself against, and it is pointing at people, it's pointing at the refugees who are trying to like reach the UK, and it's pointing at trans people, and it's saying like, those are your enemies, like, this is the thing that there's a problem with the world, is those people. It's not the systems that we've created that have like plundered the planet and, you know, caused many a crisis. It's actually those people over there. And so I think like a lot of my activism at the moment is trying to center those people and trying to create space for, you know, like at the moment I'm spending a lot of time writing, and, you know, writing is quite a solitary act, and it's quite a weird one because you kind of spend a lot of time being like, my imagination. But I just like to say everything I'm writing is like fueled by those people who like are behind me and are like pushing me forward and stretching my imagination and the capacity that I have to imagine. And, you know, at the moment I'm kind of writing around this idea of like, will there be trans people in the future? And, you know, I think there will be. I know there will be. There were trans people in the past. There are going to be trans people in the future. But, like, I guess in some ways it's like imagining into the future means that we need to be imagining beyond just our little group of people. Like, the future needs to look as diverse and as like wonderful, and to include as many people as there are on this planet right now. And that includes like those refugees who are drowning in the Mediterranean, and it includes those trans people who are, you know, being told that they're not allowed to go to the bathroom, or reading stickers on the doors of the bathrooms that they're not welcome there. Anyway, a bit of a downer. But yeah, I think like, you know, every space that you share with somebody is a space, it is a space of collective imagination. Like, we have to stir that amongst ourselves, you know, we have to start like giving people permission to imagine, not shutting people down, not saying, oh no, that's not how it is, or, you know, whatever it like, we need to keep opening up and stretching out to include more people, to include more imaginations, to, you know, make the big future vision just the most sparkly, wonderful one that we can possibly dream of. Over to you.
Yes.
Thank you, Tamsin.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, at the moment, so my imagination is actually running wild. I've been working on this project called Hard Art in collaboration with Brian Eno, and it's about how do we get artists to actually not just create art for art's sake, but art for change-making sake. I think art is the way that we change worlds in dictatorships and also in utopias. The first things that are harnessed are the arts. They're either squashed or they're allowed to really
benefit people and expand. So it just shows how important art is when it comes to having these harder conversations and imagining these better futures. And this project is about how do we bring the world's leading artists, but then also like bring this interdisciplinary nature of the world leading scientists, academics, into the same room to have these big ideas and to be given the permission to have these big ideas. So we host a mingler every month, which is really fun. There's one side that is the big topic. What are we talking about? Are we talking about propaganda? Are we talking about policy? Are we talking about governance? Are we talking about the more than human? How do we get us to create art pieces that can actually inform policy? And then how do we have the actual steps in order to get them enacted? So yes, it's really brewing to become something really beautiful, working with some really amazing people who have the hearts and now have the push and the go. And that's one thing. I'm a very good pusher. I'm very good at getting people to feel like they can, and also being there to be the carrot and the stick all at the same time. So that's what my company does in that project. It's how do we make sure that these artworks are artworks that change the world. And I'm sure that you guys will be seeing some of them very soon. And hopefully they change people's hearts and minds, because that is the hope and the dream.
Oh, whoa, what an imagination breakfast you found yourself in. This is the Radical Imagination Breakfast Buffet. We hope you're going to leave really overly full and gorged on your radical imaginations. We've got about 12 minutes, because I am, among other things, an excellent timekeeper. We've got a gorgeous full 12 minutes for questions. And an imagination exercise. I think we probably have to choose between the two. I think it would be great to hear from the audience. If there are questions, if there aren't questions, we have an exercise up our sleeve. But just want to create the space. What's in your imaginations? Hearing us speak. What are you yearning for? Yes.
That was so... Oh, my God, this is loud. Hello. Way to wake everyone
Good
up.
morning, medicine. Hello.
That was very inspiring, and I feel like my mind is really thinking so much now. Yeah, wow.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good. But I feel like there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do as well as relearning. I think, like, I look at people like my grandma, who lives in a way that's so like naturally, or spiritual and nourishing, and she has such strong values that I really wish I was brought up with. But then she also has these like very strong boundaries of like not being able to have the freedom that people have now, and like not understanding anything to do with gender in the way that we learn it now. But it's weird because before her time, everything was so much more free, and the world was healthier, and the environment was healthy. So I'm just like, obviously fear is the thing that stops people from imagining a better world, but the people who are in power, I guess, are a lot older, and they're the ones that need to obviously be the change makers, imagine all the world changing. But how do we get people who are like so stuck in their ways and like have such a deep fear of like the world not being able to be better, like when it comes to anything like creating new things and like what we wear and what we eat and not knowing where things come from? Like how do we activate that kind of change in that generation, and also like demographic that's just not used to sort of talking about because I think you do need a bit of delusion and fantasy to do the amazing things. Because like, when I started my business, I was like very like, what am I doing? This is like the least economically flourishing thing that I could do. But I want fashion to be a more open space. And so yeah, that's a very long-winded question. But do you have any thoughts?
Does anyone? Tamsin? Should we just take this question as well? Because I don't know if there's going to be time for dude, and then we could try and do both.
Yeah, good point.
I'm kind of actually interested in the idea of like how to push people, because as a woman, naturally just been trained to be a people pleaser and like shrink. So, yeah, can you give some tips, each of you? Like, how do you nudge people and not let go?
Great. So we've got how do we nudge people, not let go? How do we push the better world into being? Maybe. Yes. And then great question about the grandmothers and the older not just the grandmothers, but the older generation, and how to do that activism to shift those maybe. As you get older, I do feel your imagination starts to kind of crustify a bit more. Or maybe that's an unfair crustify. That's a word. I'm gonna. Should I? Yeah. Does anyone want to jump in? Maybe take one of them, and we could all answer one of the two questions.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I actually don't. I think the older generation really does have the space to imagine. One of my closest friends is a 75-year-old rabbi called Jeffrey. And when I say his imagination is off the chain, it is great. But there is something about, I feel like the older generations, they've lived through what does it mean to really live in a stable climate? And I think this is where the trends with Gen Z are coming up, of where we haven't lived in a stable climate. So you're kind of getting this very youthful anger. But then this is where this intergenerational element comes to, because there's so much that we can learn from our grandparents. And my grandma also still lives in the rural village in Nigeria. And there's so many life lessons. But then also I show her how to use Instagram and an iPhone. So it's kind of how do we kind of marry both of these worlds together? And I'm really interested in exploring that, especially when it comes to the more meta things, how do we mix ancient knowledge with AI? And there's so many people working on this great way of how do we take the best of both worlds, because we can have it, and that's really good. And also on the pushing point, yes, I am a pusher. My mom calls me a troublemaker, and she's always called me one. Yeah. And I feel like there is something about remembering what we are worth, and remembering what we deserve as well. Simply by being on this earth, we deserve to experience the beauty of this earth. We deserve to commune with this earth, and we deserve to show up in our truest forms, and that is something we have to learn how to do unapologetically. And that's the greatest form of self-care. It's by purging ourselves of these socializations that make us into people we don't want to be, and allowing ourselves to re-socialize ourselves into these spaces of love and care, and it's once you do that, it's and you build these relationships that are based on empathy and caring and knowing. It's I think, I always say is I'm the earth's biggest friend because I'm fucking angry by the injustice. I am disgusted, and I'll make sure that doesn't happen, and it's in the same way that we would do this with our best friends, our parents, our siblings. Why not do this for the earth? Why not do this, for everyone? And and a lot of politicians, I spend a lot of time with politicians and CEOs, and I think the biggest thing is,
Thank you for doing that work, Daze.
Thank you, Daze.
They are fucking scared. A lot of them don't know, and a lot of them are being asked by their children some really difficult questions, so they're in this place of having to learn how to manage. Okay, what does me showing up to really fully claim the power that I hold? Because a lot of them don't actually recognize how much power they hold in society and in the world broader. So it's about having that kind of the love and softness of, I will entice you, I will be kind to you, I will show you the way, but then also having the rage of being we have to do this work, and if you're not willing to do this work, I will protest you. And that's usually where I go.
Tamsin.
I honestly, the power that those in power hold is built on them being able to play this system, they played this system and they won. And they have no interest in transforming this system because this is the world that created them. And so I think how we disrupt that is how it's always been, which is we are many, they are few. The more they take, the less we have, the more our need for transformation, the more brave we're able to be, the more we'll stand up, the more we'll fight back. But it's not, it's really, I'm not a reformist at all. I don't think they have, their vested interests are so great that they have no interest in transforming. And I guess, you know, like what you were saying about, you know, the one rebellion that was going to transform everything, like, of course not. Like, and we were probably, I mean, we, like, activists are quite naive of like, okay, like, we just have to do this once. It's like, this is a slog, you know, and I think, like, we get to be alive at this moment in the human species where we, you know, where we have to reckon with everything that's come before that's led us to this precise moment where we are kind of at the peak. And like, now what are we going to do next? And, you know, it's an incredibly kind of exciting moment. It's also really tiring sometimes. And that's why we need to have communities of care, and we need to look out for each other, and we need to hold each other, and so that we can hold them to account, and that we can kind of keep walking forward. And I think, you know, like the Hollywood imagination is not how this story is going to play out. You know, it's going to be slow. There are going to be great losses. Like, there are already great losses. But there are going to be moments of victory. There's going to be moments of respite. There's going to be moments of grace where we get to be together, where we feel that thing that you were talking about of connection, of like feeling like we're participating in a different narrative, that narrative that defines them doesn't need to define us. And I think, you know, for those moments, like, this is worth it. But I think, you know, there are no easy answers. Like, there's no easy path to walk anymore. And I think, if, you know, for as long as we imagine that there is, we're deluding ourselves, we're living in fantasy. Like, it's not going to be easy. Reckoning with all of the harm that has happened and all of the harm that will happen is not going to be an easy job for us, but it's one that if we show up to, if we get to be mature in, then we can feel an enormous sense of like actual self-worth, not like the affirmation of external sources, but actual solid self-worth. And I think that's an incredibly valuable thing to feel. And then how do you, you know, how do you, like, I think women or people who have been socialized as women are extraordinary in their capacity to like push and pull, to be carrot and stick, to like find gentle ways to persuade people to do something rather than like telling people and assuming they're going to do it, or just like walking and assuming that people are going to follow. And actually, like, you know, that those forms of leadership and those ways of kind of pushing and persuading and, you know, enticing are actually the ways that like change is going to happen. Like, I think we're kind of done following people who seem like they might have a good idea that excludes everybody else. So you know, those can be your powers as well. But yes, like, people pleasing is not fun. So solidarity for that.
Yeah. For your question, Kitty, so I wanted to share some of the tools that we teach these imagination activists. And like, I feel like actually most of the tools I've been teaching are kind of tools that have worked for me as a woman trying to navigate that tricky, like, I want the world to change, but I also don't want to like get all this reaction and be stopped in that and all that complex navigation. And I feel like what we trained these council officers to do is to be these kind of like unstoppable, playful, rebellious forces, which I'm kind of like, hats off to you, Camden Council, for being up for that. And like, some of that is like actually kind of having an inner trust that everybody wants a world that is better for everyone. So it's like, one of the tools we teach is composting the no. This is the tool we use. So, you know, being an imagination activist, you have to get into the practice of being met with lots of no's, lots of cynicism. Like, it's got to become part of like your breakfast. You've just got to eat the cynicism for breakfast. It's just like, it's a feature, not a bug that you're going to get. Pushback, you're going to get no, you're going to get cynicism. So there are different ways that like psychologically you can kind of compost the no in your mind. So rather than it's like, I've got this great idea and the person's like, no, I don't think we have the budget. It's like, okay, so it's a no right now. Okay, so there's not enough budget if we do it in this way. So let's look at that. How much budget is there? Like, what would it take? What if there was no budget? What could we do without budget? So it's like being like, how do you just keep on getting that? I mean, it's tiring, but like, and you need to refuel that positivity and that kind of dogged, like, perseverance, right? Because it's like, you are, obviously, if we're changing the system that works for people in power, there's going to be loads of no. There's going to be loads of like throwing doubt, throwing shade, and actually starting to get that muscle flexed of being used to that is really important. The other thing is that we train people to not be the no themselves. So like how many times, has someone come to you with an idea and maybe you're busy or maybe you're inner cynic. We all have that inner cynic where once upon a time we were young kids who had this dream of what the world could be like, and slowly, death by 1,000 cuts, there's this cynicism and kind of like, oh my gosh, disappointment, betrayal from the system. And actually, by accident, you could end up becoming that no to others. So how do we train that capacity to be like, I love that idea, yes, and maybe we could do this, and maybe we could do this. So that tool from improv to like build the energy of people, like human imagination is such a scarce resource these days. We should see it like kind of golden nuggets in a mountain of dirt, where it's like someone's got an idea and feels passion. Thank goodness, let's pour fuel on that. So how can you become that kind of force that builds up and lifts up people's imaginations? And I think the last one is backcasting, this tool backcasting, where if you've got an idea, you've got a project, rather than being like, I think we should do this, speaking from the present into the future of like, I think we should do this and this is my idea and please support me, saying it's 2030. The streets are filled with gardens and there are courgettes overflowing and people are picking their salads for their lunch. That's the project that I want to do. That's what I'm enlisting you to. So like, how can you lead with that future? Like, it's already there. It's inevitable. And invite people into that inevitable future. Get them hungry for it. I think that's part of it, is like stoking that longing so people can almost taste that future.
And there's a really good passage in Rob Hopkins' book, from what if to what is.
Yeah.
And it's
Big up Rob Hopkins.
Yeah, the first chapter is amazing, and it makes you think like the world can be so delicious if only we like felt like we deserved it.
Yeah. From what is to what if. It's a great.
From what if to what is.
No, I think it's from what is to what if. For what is, as in the present, to what if.
There you go. See,
I'm going to push back on that. I'm pretty sure it's what is to what if.
But Rob Hopkins, and you'll find it.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I think we've we're 4 minutes over. Any closing final thank yous? Well, thanks to both of you. Thank you to all of your the 100,000 people that showed up this morning for this 9 a.m. panel. Barely been able to contain you in this tent. And thank you to Advaya for hosting us.
Thank you, Advaya. Have a wonderful, wonderful festival.
Woo!